Hello everyone, my name is Case Miranda and today I will be talking about the relationship between the Chicano murals in Los Angeles and the Chicano movement, prepared as part of the class Intro to Chicanx Latinx Histories, History 17CH at the Claremont Colleges. So in a broad sense, murals and the Chicano movement are somewhat one and the same. This is because a lot of the murals that play a role in the Chicano movement were painted and created by muralists who were Chicano themselves and often wanted to use their murals as a medium for activism because art can communicate some really strong messages. So let's first define what the Chicano movement is, also known as el Movimiento, and then talk about its history. El Movimiento was a social and political movement that established the Chicanx identity through resistance and protest of colonialism and discrimination. The Chicano movement fought back against institutional racism, rejected assimilation into a white America, and encouraged the revitalization of Mexican culture within the United States. When talking about the Chicano movement, we also need to talk about its influences. Resistance movements by Mexican Americans such as the United Farm Workers and Pachuca culture were precedent for the movement. But the Black Power movements influenced many of the political strategies used by movement leaders. The time frame for these was about 1940s to 1950s, while the main Chicano movement was about 1960s to 1970s. So with that, I want to try to show how these murals were important to the Chicano movement and in what ways they were one and the same. I want to start by giving a really quick history of Chicano and Mexican mural art. There is a long tradition of mural art in Mexico as an act of resistance, so it is not too surprising that murals became the art of choice for the Chicano movement. In Los Angeles, Chicano mural art first emerged during the time of La Raza in the 1960s and first concerned itself with identity and political activism. Chicano mural art then gained widespread attention in the early 1970s, and there was actually a surge of murals due to increased awareness of ethnic identity at that time. With that in mind, I want to turn to an important muralist of the 1970s. Johnny Gonzalez is recognized as one of the founders of the mural movement and is known for two murals, The Story of Our Struggle and The Birth of Our Art. In 2007, he was interviewed with Irma Nunez by UCLA Chicano Studies for a rather extensive oral history. If you don't know, an oral history is usually some sort of document or transcript that records someone's personal history and experiences in their own words. In his interview, Gonzalez describes his thought process for drafting The Birth of Our Art. He wanted to convey the birth of mestizo, so he decided to put Cortes on one side of the mural and La Malinche on the other, with the former representing Spain and the latter representing Mexico. Gonzalez then says he often asks himself what his choices mean culturally and what message they will convey. In asking these questions, he is careful of what he includes. For example, on the Mexican side, he included elements of Mayan, Aztec, Mixtec, and Toltec culture. This choice is important to the Chicano movement because it references a connection to the homeland of Aztlan, both a mythical place for the Aztec people and for the Chicano movement, and acts as a place of cultural revitalization. Gonzalez describes how he wanted to place the stage on a map with what he called deep perspective, and shows how he used a flowering plant to tie the perspective together. He recounts a Mexican muralist, Siqueiros, and how he also used perspective like this. Gonzalez describes how he used this flower as a birthplace, with Cortes and La Malinche coming out of it to represent the culture of the past. He describes how in his thought process, his next choice was important. He drew in Cortes and La Malinche throwing seeds which ended up in East Los Angeles, then drew the plant growing out from there and then throughout the United States. Gonzalez then explains how he wanted to show the plant being killed by commercialism to protest capitalism, and how the United States devalues actions for the sake of art and history, but he didn't. Later, Gonzalez moves on to another mural of his, The Story of Our Struggle, and describes how he wanted to tell a history of struggle starting from the beginning of civilization in Central America. This mural is made of many individual panels and includes imagery such as Cortes harming native people, religion harming native culture, Cinco de Mayo, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the United States taking away Mexican culture, the farm workers movements, and more. In one panel, Gonzalez describes how he used chains being cut to show Chicanos being freed from struggle, discrimination, and exploitation. Now, Gonzalez uses strong cultural elements to talk about the history and values which are important to the Chicano movement, but that is not the only way that murals helped the movement along. Many murals were politically focused on recent social issues, and I want to show 3 murals that do so. First, we have a mural titled "We Are Not a Minority," painted at Estrada Courts in Los Angeles. This mural parodies the Uncle Sam Wants You posters of recruitment for World War I. By doing so, the mural suggests that Che Guevara wants to recruit for the Chicano movement and conveys a strong revolutionary message. This message is of cultural nationalism and anti-colonialism, and with that, this mural became a very direct and powerful mural for the movement. The second mural is a kind of timeline for the Chicano movement and is painted on the United Farm Workers El Teatro Campesino Cultural Center in Del Rey. This mural shows us a vague origin story for the movement by depicting prominent figures in Chicano and civil rights activism throughout time. From left to right, we can see La Adelita of the Mexican Revolution of 1910, Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa, who were folk heroes to young Chicanos, Joaquin Murrieta of the Gold Rush, Cesar Chavez of the Farm Workers Movement, Reyes Lopez Tijerina of the land grant struggle, a Black Panther Malcolm X figure, and finally Martin Luther King Jr. On top of this, the placement of this mural itself has meaning for the movement, as El Teatro Campesino was a vital theater group for the farm workers movement and also inspired other Chicano theater groups later on. The final mural is also at Estrada Courts in East LA. Titled Black and White Moratorium Walls, it tells the story of the Chicano movement of August 1970. This was a march, a rally, and a protest against the Vietnam War and the impacts it had on Chicanos in the U.S. It protested that Chicanos and people of color in general were disproportionately affected by the war, largely due to a vulnerability of being drafted and enlisting due to economic need. In black and white, this mural shows numerous incidents of police brutality at the march and links them to the routine police brutality on barrio residents. This rally is also related to the death of LA Times reporter Ruben Salazar, who is thought to have been assassinated at the moratorium. His death had an enormous meaning for the movement because he had been a huge player in getting Chicano voices in major media and newspapers. To quickly summarize what we can learn from Gonzalez, these murals, and the history of the Chicano movement, I want to restate the connections between them. Whether it is Aztlán, rejection of being a minority, anti-colonialism and protesting wars and drafts, working towards cultural revitalization within the United States, or fighting for workers' rights, Chicano mural art reflects many of the values of El Movimiento and did a lot of work in spreading that message both as a piece of art and as non-verbal activism.